Jack Thorne was 23 alone, and standing on a gallows in Bitter Creek, a seamstress with calloused hands and no family left to vouch for her. The rope creaked above her. The judge called her a thief, the only witness his wife. Then a voice slurred from the crowd. "That verdict seems mighty rushed." A dusty man in a poncho stepped forward, smelling of whiskey, eyes sharp as nails. He held an old badge. They said he was drunk, but the velvet cloth he carried wrapped around a missing emerald necklace said otherwise. She had no one. Now, maybe, she did. When lies hold power, who dares ask the real questions? Would you Bitter Creek didn't have a courthouse? Just a wooden platform next to the livery, and a judge who liked the sound of his own gavel. On that spring morning, the whole town gathered to watch a girl hang. Jack Thorne, 23, all elbows and stitches, stood barefoot on the gallows with her wrists tied and her chin held higher than most expected. She wasn't crying. Not anymore. Not since the night she was dragged from her room, above the dress shop, and locked in the hay barn, where the sheriff said women like her belonged. The crime theft. A necklace emerald green worth more than every bolt of fabric Jack ever touched. The judge's wife swore she saw it in Jack's sewing basket, claimed the girl was planning to sell it, maybe run. Jack hadn't spoken in 2 days, not since her last plea was drowned out by the judge's booming voice. No counsel, no kin, no proof of innocence. Justice must be swift, and swift it was. The noose creaked in the wind, tied too tight by the same deputy who'd once asked her for a button sewn on his Sunday shirt. Townsfolk leaned forward in their boots, popcorn in greasy hands, whispers flying, she never fit in anyway. Quiet girls always hiding something, pretty but sly. The clock struck 11. Sheriff Lane cleared his throat. "Any last words, miss?" Jack opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, but no sound came. Her lips were cracked. Her dress, sky blue with faded lace, still bore a burn mark from the iron she dropped the night before the arrest. Behind her, the judge stood straight-backed in his fine coat hands, resting on the railing like he was conducting a play. His wife fanned herself beside him, face pinched with disgust. That was when the voice came. "That verdict seems mighty rushed." It was slow, slurred, but it cut through the hush like a match to kindling. Heads turned. A man stood beneath the platform, half hidden by the crowd. He wore a tattered poncho the color of dried mud and boots that hadn't seen polish in years. A wide-brim hat sat low over his brow, casting shadow across a jaw covered in a week's worth of stubble. He swayed slightly as he stepped forward, a tin flask swinging from one hand. The other gripped a crooked walking stick oak by the look of it, with carvings running up the side. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You got something to say, stranger?" The man hiccuped, once wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve. "Yup, saying, y'all might be hanging the wrong girl." The judge's laugh echoed. "This is a court of law, not a saloon. Who are you to interrupt?" The man didn't blink. He reached into the folds of his coat, slow like every movement hurt, and pulled out something shiny. A badge, worn and old edges dulled by time, but unmistakable. "Caleb Mackenzie," he said, "formerly of the U.S. Marshals. Retired, mostly." Whispers turned to murmurs. Someone at the back gasped. "Thought he died in Tucson." "Nah, he got shot and just disappeared." The judge paled just for a second. "That doesn't give you authority here." "Maybe not," Caleb replied, coughing, "but it gives me questions, and y'all don't seem in a rush to answer 'em." He turned to Jack. Their eyes met. She blinked once, confused, then twice. "No defense, no evidence, just a lady's word," Caleb said, raising an eyebrow. "Seems light for a death sentence. Unless there's more y'all ain't telling." The crowd shifted uneasily. Sheriff Lane looked to the judge. "Your Honor, proceed," the judge snapped. "We've heard enough." But no one moved, not even the hangman. Caleb stepped closer to the gallows. He wasn't swaying now. "Let's start simple," he said. "Where was the judge's wife that night, and how come no one else saw the necklace after the arrest?" A ripple of doubt moved through Bitter Creek. The sun climbed higher, but no shadow was darker than the one now falling over the judge's stand. And Jack, she wasn't crying anymore. She was watching. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice rising from the dust to make a town remember what justice is supposed to look like. The badge glinted in the sun like something pulled from the bottom of a forgotten well, worn, scratched, but still carrying the weight of law, or at least the memory of it. Caleb Mackenzie didn't move fast. He leaned against the gallows rail, like his bones were older than the hills, but his eyes were sharp, scanning, calculating, locking on faces like bullets in a chamber. Judge Blackwood stood still, hands folded neatly in front of him, but the color had drained from his cheeks. "You're interrupting due process," he said coldly. "Martial or not, this is a lawful proceeding carried out under my authority." Caleb spat once to the side. "Problem is, Your Honor, you skipped the law part. Straight to the hanging. Ain't even noon." The sheriff shifted uneasily beside the judge. "If you're here to file an appeal, you're about 36 hours too late." "I'm not here to appeal," Caleb said, pulling a folded scrap of paper from his coat. "I'm here to ask questions. This here's a warrant from a federal judge out of Santa Fe, gives me investigating rights on suspicious capital cases. You ever heard of those?" Sheriff Lane looked down, then gave a slight nod. "I've heard of 'em." "Well then," Caleb muttered, "let's talk about that necklace." He stepped forward closer to the gallows. The hangman backed away. Jack didn't speak, didn't flinch. Just stood there, eyes following Caleb, like he was a rope being thrown to someone drowning. Judge Caleb said, dragging a wooden crate toward the platform and planting himself on it like a man settling in for a long story. "You say, this girl stole an emerald necklace from your wife." "Yes, she did," the judge snapped. "My wife saw it in her sewing basket. The maid can confirm she was seen leaving the study where it was kept." Caleb tilted his head. "Funny, 'cause I spoke to that maid on the walk over. Pretty sure she ain't worked in your house for 2 weeks left after some disagreement over pay." Blackwood's lip twitched. "And that sewing basket," Caleb added, voice like gravel. "Was it checked for fingerprints?" "Witnesses. Anything besides a lady's word and a judge's temper." "We don't need all that," the judge replied sharply. "We have testimony and motive. Miss Thorne was planning to flee town." Caleb turned toward the crowd. "Anyone see her trying to leave? Horse-packed, ticket-bought bag at the ready silence." Then a few heads shook. A woman whispered, "She came into my shop that morning, bought thread and buttons, said she was starting a wedding dress for the mayor's niece." Caleb's brow rose. "Strange behavior for a runaway thief, don't you think?" Blackwood stepped forward, voice clipped. "This is ridiculous. This man is clearly drunk and unfit to cross-examine a courtroom." Caleb smirked, slow and sour. "Maybe I smell like whiskey, Judge, but I ain't the one with something to hide." The crowd stirred. The atmosphere shifted not all at once, but like a breeze pushing smoke through dry pine. Suspicion traveled faster than truth in Bitter Creek, but right now suspicion was on Caleb's side. Sheriff Lane turned to the judge. "Sir, maybe it's worth pausing the—" "No," Blackwood barked. "We proceed. This is all theater." Caleb stood the crate creaking beneath him. "You're right about that, but sometimes theater shows what the dark tries to hide." He turned, faced Jack. Her lips parted slightly, surprise flickering through her exhaustion. "You remember anything strange about the night before they came for you?" Caleb asked gently. "Anything out of place?" Jack swallowed hard. "The dog," she whispered. "The judge's dog wouldn't stop barking at the rose garden. I thought maybe a fox had gotten in." Caleb turned back to the crowd. "I reckon I'll go take a look at that garden." Blackwood stiffened. "You'll do no such thing." "Watch me," Caleb said, tucking the badge back inside his coat. He turned and walked off, not stumbling once. Behind him the crowd parted. The sheriff scratched his beard, eyes narrowed. Even the judge's wife gripped her parasol a little tighter. And Jack, she didn't say it aloud, but for the first time since the rope was knotted, her shoulders relaxed just enough to notice. The drunk wasn't stumbling anymore, and the judge's house had a dog that barked at secrets buried too shallow. By the time Caleb returned, the sun had tipped past noon, and the crowd at the gallows had thinned, though no one had truly gone home. Folks lingered in shops or leaned on porch rails, sipping watered-down lemonade like they were still waiting for the second act of a play that wasn't finished. He came back walking steady, a smudge of dirt across his cheek and a thin velvet pouch tucked beneath one arm. A hound dog followed close behind him, nose twitching, tail down. Judge Blackwood, still perched on the gallows, didn't stand up. He just watched, jaw-tight, eyes hard. Sheriff Lane stepped forward. "Where have you been?" "Gardening," Caleb said mildly. He tapped at the pouch. "Found this under a rose bush. Same one your dog's been howling at since Tuesday, I heard." The judge's wife stiffened. "You had no right, ma'am." Caleb cut in, voice dry as dust. "I got a federal right to dig where suspicion points." He stepped up to the edge of the gallows, reached into the pouch, and slowly unwrapped the cloth for all to see. There it was. An emerald necklace green as envy and just as sharp-looking. A fine gold chain too delicate for a ranch wife, but perfect for show. Still dusted in dry soil. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A little girl near the bakery whispered, "Mama, that's it. That's the necklace from the window display." Judge Blackwood stood suddenly. "This proves nothing." "Don't it?" Caleb replied, holding the necklace toward the sheriff. "Jack didn't bury it. She was already under lock and key when that dog started barking." The sheriff hesitated, then took the pouch, unwrapping the necklace again for a closer look. "It's the same one, no question," Blackwood snapped. "The girl had time, could have hidden it before she was caught." Caleb turned to the crowd. "Then maybe we ought to ask who else had access to the judge's garden. Who tends them roses anyhow?" That struck a nerve. Mrs. Blackwood's lips parted, but no sound came. A woman stepped forward from the back, older gray streaks in her braid apron still tied. "I pruned them bushes last," she said. 3 days before the arrest. There weren't nothing there." Caleb nodded. "Then it got planted after." But by who eyes turned to the judge and his wife, slowly, like a tide coming in. Jack, still on the platform, stared at the necklace like it might disappear. "That's it," she whispered. "But I never touched it." "I know," Caleb said quietly. "Thing is, someone was trying real hard to make sure you never said a word." Sheriff Lane rubbed the back of his neck. "We may need to take a pause here. Reopen the investigation." "No." Blackwood barked the echo hard. "We'll lose order. A thief's tears don't change facts." Caleb lifted a brow. "Funny how facts bend when folks are scared of them." He turned again to the crowd. "You all remember Founders Day 3 nights back. Whole town gathered by the river for stew and songs. But Jack wasn't there, was working. Meanwhile, this necklace went missing. Ain't it odd how no one saw her leave yet? She's accused by just one person, who just so happens to be the judge's wife," more murmurs. A shopkeeper frowned. A teacher in spectacles whispered something to her neighbor. Then Caleb stepped closer to the sheriff. Might be time to ask the maid what she really saw before she left, and ask why the judge's stove was burning at midnight 2 days after. Sheriff Lane gave a slow nod. "I'll get her. And I'll get answers," Caleb said, looking now toward Jack. "You got more people watching your back than you think, miss." Jack's lip trembled, but she nodded. Her voice came quiet, like someone learning to trust their lungs again. "Thank you." And Caleb tipped his hat to her, just a flick of his fingers, worn but certain. Because justice didn't always come loud. Sometimes it came wrapped in velvet, pulled from under a thorn bush, and handed over by a man who smelled like whiskey, but saw straight through the lies. The next morning, Bitter Creek moved slower than usual. Folks still came out for the Founders Day lunch pies laid out in rows, biscuits steaming from worn tin trays, children darting between knees with syrup on their fingers, but something had shifted. Conversations that usually orbited weather and cattle now circled the gallows, and more than one person found themselves glancing over their shoulder. Jack wasn't back in her cell. Sheriff Lane, after a long talk with Caleb the night before, had moved her to the church parlor, quiet-shaded, and watched by 2 deputies. She sat on a wooden bench beneath a stained glass window, her hands folded in her lap, like she didn't know what to do with them, now that they weren't tied. Meanwhile, Caleb wandered the square like a man on a hunt. No badge on display, no gun drawn, just that battered poncho, that steady walk, and a voice that coaxed more out of people than a whip ever could. He started with Miss Della, the schoolteacher who ran the one-room school, just past the blacksmith. She was sipping weak coffee under the awning of the bakery when Caleb tipped his hat. "Mind if I ask something odd?" he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Della blinked. "You've been asking odd things since you showed up, Mr. Mackenzie," he chuckled. "Fair enough." "You were at Founders Day supper." She nodded. "Everyone was." "Did you talk to Jack Thorne that day?" Della paused. "No, but I remember she came into the schoolhouse a few days before, dropped off a set of mended curtains for the windows. I thanked her, and she mentioned hearing something strange at the judge's house the night before. Muffled voices, like someone crying. Said it wasn't her business, but she hoped whoever it was got help." Caleb leaned forward. "You tell anyone?" Didn't seem important at the time. He stood nodding. "It might be now." From there, he went to the general store. Old Sam Brewster, who ran it for 30 years, was restocking nails when Caleb asked if he remembered the night the necklace went missing. Sam scratched his beard. "I remember I delivered coal to the judge's place 2 days later, saw ash in the stove that hadn't been cleaned yet. Odd time to be burnin' wood. I thought weather was warm that week. Caleb's eyes narrowed. See anything in the ashes? Half a letter. Burned right through, but one word stuck out. Said Carson. Didn't mean much to me, so I didn't think on it. Could be Carson City, Caleb said. Could be Sam, murmured his voice low. By mid-afternoon, the whispers had grown legs. She heard someone crying. Letter from Carson City. The maid quit right after. Ashes in the stove, remember. Even the kids seemed quieter, their laughter thinning in the heat. Caleb circled back to the church, ducked into the side room, where Jack sat in her cotton dress, trying to smooth the wrinkles from the skirt. You all right? He asked. She nodded, then shook her head. I don't know how to be. One minute I'm counting stitches, the next I'm waiting to die. Caleb lowered himself onto the pew beside her. People are remembering things, Jack. Things they didn't think mattered. Jack's eyes flicked toward the window. But will it be enough? That depends on what else the judge is hiding, and how many folks are willing to stop pretending they don't see it. She swallowed hard. They still think I'm no one. He glanced at her, voice softer. Then, let's make sure they remember your name. That night, the crowd that had cheered for a hanging 2 days ago stood quieter in the square. The gallows still stood casting long shadows in the lamplight. But folks weren't looking up at the noose anymore. They were looking at each other, and at Caleb. Because something was stirring in Bitter Creek, and it wasn't just gossip. It was doubt. And doubt once planted had a way of growing roots. By late evening, the sky over Bitter Creek had turned copper. A hush swept the square, not out of reverence, but anticipation. Folks weren't just curious anymore, they were restless and uneasy. The gallows still loomed like a scar, but it stood empty now. Jack sat quietly in a wooden chair near the old bandstand, guarded by a single deputy who looked more like a man keeping her safe than holding her captive. Her hands were folded again, but this time they didn't tremble. Caleb Mackenzie stood in the center of the square, the townsfolk forming a wide circle around him. His coat flapped in the breeze, his hat pulled low. Sheriff Lane stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw tight. Judge Blackwood remained near the platform, lips pressed thin. His wife perched beside him on a bench, her parasol gone, her hair pulled too tight, like she was bracing for something she didn't know how to stop. Caleb cleared his throat. His voice didn't rise, didn't dramatize. He spoke the way a man does when he's laid 100 coffins to rest and knows the truth's weight by heart. I came here for a hanging, he said, but not the one y'all planned. The crowd shifted. I came because of a letter he continued holding up, a burned scrap pulled from a coat pocket. Found in the judge's stove, not much left of it, but just enough. He handed it to the sheriff, who held it up for those nearby to see. One word remained visible, Carson. Carson City, Caleb said, which happens to be where a man named Henry Blackstone disappeared from 5 years ago, embezzled $50,000 from a land bank, left behind a wife, and a trial warrant. Judge Blackwood didn't move, but his jaw clenched. Caleb turned to the judge's wife. Tell me something, ma'am. Did you know who your husband was before he came to Bitter Creek? Her mouth opened, shut, opened again, and then cracked like glass. I didn't know at first, she said, voice thin. He told me he was starting over, said his past didn't matter if we kept quiet. He said no one would come looking. Whispers rippled outward. Caleb stepped closer, and Jack Thorne, she was a seamstress, just happened to be working in your house when a letter came, from Nevada, from the real Mrs. Blackstone. The judge's wife choked on a sob. She read it. Caleb said, voice low, didn't she? She found it. The wife cried, folding into herself. She wasn't snooping. I swear it. She just picked it up with the mail. I didn't know what to do. Henry, he said we had to make her seem dishonest, or she'd ruin us both. The judge bolted to his feet, fury boiling through his polished words. She's hysterical, delusional. That girl stole no Henry, his wife shouted. She saw what you didn't mean for her to see. Gasps turned to shouts. The crowd surged forward. Sheriff Lane raised a hand, shouting for calm, but Blackwood wasn't listening. He pulled a pistol from beneath his coat and yanked Jack to her feet, one arm tight around her neck, the barrel pressed to her temple. Stay back, he snarled. All of you. The crowd froze. Caleb didn't flinch, didn't draw, just looked him square in the eye, voice steady as stone. You don't want to do that, Henry. She ruined everything, the judge spat. I built this town's name. You built a lie, Caleb said slowly, taking a step forward, and now it's crumbling. Back off. Not another step, Sheriff Lane warned, hand hovering at his sidearm. Jack's eyes were wide, breathing shallow, but she didn't scream. Instead, her elbow jabbed back hard fast, right into the judge's ribs, enough to jolt him. He staggered, and in one fluid motion, Caleb moved. The pistol clattered to the dirt. The silence was deafening. Caleb stood over Blackwood boot, planted on the man's wrist. Sheriff Lane reached down and took the gun. Jack sagged to the ground, breathing hard, the noose from days ago still burning in her memory. Caleb didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He just looked at the people and said, "Now maybe we start listening to the ones nobody believed." And this time, Bitter Creek did. The air in Bitter Creek stood still, like even the wind was holding its breath. Judge Blackwood Joe Henry Blackstone. As the name now rang and every whisper knelt in the dust, his fancy coat torn and his badge of office nowhere to be seen. The revolver lay several feet away, kicked clear by Caleb's boot. His wife sobbed quietly nearby, shoulders shaking beneath her silk shawl. Jack sat on the ground beside the platform, dazed but upright, cradling her elbow from where she'd struck him. Her hair clung to her cheek with sweat, but her eyes, those were clear, sharp even. She hadn't broken. Caleb crouched down beside her. "You all right?" "I think so," she breathed. "I didn't mean to move, it just happened." He smiled, slow and tired. "Good instinct. Lucky one, too." Sheriff Lane picked up the judge's revolver and inspected it. Loaded. All 6 rounds. He looked at Blackwood. "You were going to shoot a girl in front of half the town. You almost got away with all of it." Blackwood didn't speak. His chest heaved, lips thin with rage or shame, maybe both. Lane motioned to his deputy. "Take him into custody. Tight cuffs." The deputy, a quiet man named Miles, stepped forward, binding the judge's wrists with iron. The sound of the shackles clicking shut was louder than a gunshot. Folks in the crowd flinched. "Where you taking him?" someone called out. "Town jail for now," Lane said. "Then Santa Fe'll take him from there." "But who's in charge?" another man shouted. Caleb straightened, brushing dirt from his knees. "You got a sheriff who didn't look away. That's a start." "Wasn't enough," a woman muttered. "Took you to see it." Lane looked over. "He's right. I should have seen it sooner. I followed Blackwood too long without question." "You were trying to keep order," Caleb said gently. "But order without justice is just fear wearing a badge." Lane nodded once. No fight in him, just truth. "Mackenzie," he said, voice low, "if you're willing, I could use your help, at least until the dust settles." Caleb looked at Jack, then at the crowd. "You got 32 convictions signed by that man's hand. That means 32 stories that need retelling." He gave a soft exhale. "Yeah, I'll help." A slow ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Not fear, not confusion, but something new. Respect. Jack stood with help from Caleb. She dusted off her dress, wincing just slightly. Her voice came out hoarse but firm. "What happens to me now?" "You walk out of here free," Caleb said. "And if you want, if it's safe, you leave Bitter Creek behind." Her gaze swept the square. Some folks looked away, some didn't. "I've got nothing left here," she said. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of parchment. "Stagecoach ticket. Denver. Bought it this morning just in case." Jack blinked. "You planned that?" He shrugged. "I had a feeling. Wasn't sure which way this would go, but figured you deserved the option." She took the paper, fingers trembling. Sheriff Lane spoke again, louder this time. "There will be an emergency town meeting tonight after supper. All who were tried under Judge Blackwood will be given their records reviewed publicly." More nods. Caleb's eyes met Lane's. "Burn the gallows." That caught the town off guard. Lane nodded slowly. "Yeah, I reckon we will." And as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the square, Caleb and Jack stood side by side. No rope between them this time. The badge Caleb once tucked away now sat on his chest, plain and visible. And the man who once smelled of whiskey and regret, he was clear-eyed now, because justice had a sound that day, not a gunshot or a gavel, but the soft jingle of handcuffs, and a woman finally breathing free. The town meeting that night was the fullest Bitter Creek had seen in a decade. Folks crammed shoulder to shoulder in the old church hall, where the ceiling fans turned too slow and sweat clung to every back. The pews overflowed, and even the windows were propped open so those outside could listen. At the front, beneath a wooden cross and faded oil lamp, stood Sheriff Lane and Caleb Mackenzie. Jack sat quietly in the front row, hands folded in her lap. Her face held a calm she hadn't worn in weeks. No rope hung over her head now, no shadow of doubt. Just the quiet, steady breath of someone still learning how freedom feels. Caleb opened a leather-bound chest they'd carried in that morning from the judge's private study. It creaked when it opened, like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside were ledgers, dozens of them. Lane lifted one and turned it toward the crowd. These here are court records, deed transfers, and sentencing logs, all in Blackwood's hand. Some stamped, some not. Some names you'll know, some you won't believe. He handed the first to a rancher named Elias Todd. "You've been missing 20 acres near the canyon rim, right?" Elias squinted. "Yeah. Claimed it under the Homestead Act, then got a letter saying it was a clerical mistake." Caleb nodded. "Turns out Blackwood filed a fake correction, then sold the land back to a mining outfit under his wife's name." Gasps followed. A second ledger. Annie Talbot Lane read, "You lost your boarding house 2 winters back." Annie stepped forward, hands shaking. "They said I defaulted on a loan. I never signed nothing." Caleb flipped the page. "You didn't. Judge Blackwood did. Signed your name in ink that matched the courthouse ledger. Slipped it through on a day the clerk was out sick." Another gasp. Another face gone pale. The stories kept coming, 32 cases in total. Everyone signed off by Blackwood. Everyone affecting the poor, the widowed, the quiet ones who never had the coin or voice to fight back. Jack looked around the room. These were the same people who'd once called her a thief, who stood silent as the rope was knotted. But now they listened, and more than a few bowed their heads. "This ain't just shameful," Lane said, voice low and gravelly. "It's criminal. And it stops now." A man in the back called out, "What do we do with all this?" Caleb rested his hands on the pulpit. "You reopen every case. You file restitution claims. You vote for a new council that doesn't answer to fear. And you speak up." Jack added, her voice strong and sure for the first time in days. "When something don't feel right, you say something, even if your voice shakes." There was silence. Then slow clapping, one set of hands, then another, and then it spread until the church pulsed with the sound of something more than applause. It was reckoning. Afterward, as folks filed out under the stars, Sheriff Lane caught up to Caleb by the steps. "You sure you're not staying longer?" Caleb scratched his chin. "Don't tempt me. You did good, Mackenzie. I just asked questions no one else wanted to," Caleb said. "That girl saved her own life when she refused to stop telling the truth. I just cleared the dust." Lane offered his hand. Caleb shook it firm. "You think it's over?" Lane asked. Caleb looked back toward the chest of ledgers. "Not yet, but the silence is." And in the darkness, as the church doors shut behind them, the town of Bitter Creek finally exhaled, because justice didn't come with noise or fire that night. It came in ink and paper and testimony and trembling hands. And in the names they would now have to say out loud. At dawn, a single column of smoke curled above Bitter Creek. Not from a kitchen fire or a blacksmith's forge, but from the gallows. The old wood platform, where a young woman nearly lost her life, now crackled and hissed under orange flame. Sheriff Lane had lit the match himself. After posting a handwritten notice, "By order of the people, no more hangings in Bitter Creek, without federal oversight and unanimous public review." The town didn't cheer. They just watched quiet and still as the noose turned to ash, and the crossbeams fell in on themselves. Some crossed their arms, some wiped their eyes. And some, like Annie Talbot, stood with hands clasped like in church, like she was praying something holy had just begun. Jack watched from across the street, standing beside the churchyard fence, arms wrapped loosely around herself. Her dress was freshly washed, her hair tied back, but her eyes held something weightier than relief. It was reflection. It was ache. Caleb stepped up beside her, the morning sun catching in the lines around his eyes. "You all right?" he asked. "I keep thinking how close I came," she whispered, "and how no one would have asked a single question if you hadn't shown up." He didn't reply right away, just leaned against the fence post beside her. "It wasn't just me," he finally said. "It was you telling the truth, even when it hurt. It was the maid, the teacher, the shopkeep, all the quiet ones who started speaking up." Jack glanced at him, but they needed someone to ask first. He gave a small shrug. "Sometimes justice just needs a stubborn drunk with nothing left to lose." She smiled faintly. You ever gonna tell me why you really came here? Caleb looked out over the still-burning gallows. Got a letter from a friend. Said the law was bending wrong in Bitter Creek. I didn't plan to stay. But the second I saw that rope, something in me said I'd seen this before too many times. Jack nodded slowly. Well, I'm glad you did. They stood in silence for a moment longer, the fire popping behind them, the town breathing in new air. Later that morning, Sheriff Lane posted a full list of reopened cases on the side of the church. It stretched nearly 3 pages, handwritten in thick ink names, underlined and dates bolded. Each case was assigned a new hearing. Witnesses would be called, compensation discussed. The town council, once a group of yes-men to Blackwood, had been dissolved entirely. Elections were scheduled for the following week. Jack was offered a chance to testify in front of a traveling circuit judge due next month. She accepted, not out of revenge, but out of something sturdier resolve. And as word spread to nearby towns, letters began to arrive. One from a family in Carson City, grateful to know what had become of Henry Blackstone. Another from a land clerk in Santa Fe, confirming forged deeds tied to Bitter Creek. The truth once buried had begun to scatter like seeds in wind. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A small group of townsfolk, Annie Talbot, the Brewsters, young Levi from the livery, brought flowers. Fresh-picked wildflowers, mostly daisies and prairie roses. They laid them on the patch of scorched earth where the gallows had stood. For Jack, someone said aloud. Jack stepped forward, heart pounding, unsure whether to cry or run. But no one looked at her with suspicion now, just quiet gratitude, respect. She knelt, placed one hand on the warm soil, and whispered something no one else heard. Behind her, Caleb watched. Later that night, as lanterns flickered and supper plates were cleared, Caleb sat alone on the steps of the town hall. Sheriff Lane joined him, handing over a folded envelope. What's this? Caleb asked. A badge renewal form? You're the only man I trust to wear it right now. Caleb took the envelope, thumbed the edges, then smiled slow and quiet. I'll think about it, he said. Because Bitter Creek didn't just burn its gallows that day, it buried the silence that almost killed an innocent woman. And in the space left behind, something rare was growing, truth steady and slow. The kind that didn't need a noose to keep order. 3 weeks later, the sign above the shop door in Denver read simply, Thorn and Thread. The lettering was hand-painted gold on forest green with a delicate needle carved into the wooden post beneath it. Jack stood at the window that morning, adjusting a row of finished dresses, simple cotton pieces with clean seams and quiet beauty. Nothing flashy, nothing meant to impress folks who judged by wealth. These were clothes made for women who worked, who raised children, who sewed their own buttons when the world forgot them. She looked older now, but in a good way, more grounded, more certain of the space she took up. She still jumped at loud footsteps sometimes, still caught herself checking over her shoulder, but she stood taller. She smiled easier. A customer tapped on the door just after 9, a mother with a girl in tow holding a torn hem. Jack opened the door, welcomed them in. For the next hour, she measured stitched and told them about a shipment of thread coming in from the east. Her voice had steadied into something sure. By noon, she'd sold 2 dresses and earned more coin than she'd made in Bitter Creek during any full week. She closed shop for lunch and sat by the window with a sandwich and a cup of tea. That's when she saw him. Same poncho, same hat. But this time, Caleb McKenzie was clean-shaven, his coat pressed, and a fresh tin badge clipped near his breast pocket. He didn't knock, just stood there for a second, a slow grin spreading under his mustache. Jack opened the door. Took you long enough. I was letting you get ahead in sales, he said. Didn't want to distract the customers, she smirked. You succeedin'. Come in or you just passing through. He stepped inside, ducking his head slightly. The smell of linen and fresh bread filled the shop. He looked around, taking in the bolts of fabric, the sewing desk near the stove, and the line of finished work. You built all this, he asked. She nodded. Not all on my own. The woman who owns the bakery 2 doors down, she helped me lease it. Said she used to be a laundress before she lost her husband. Folks here are different. He stepped closer to the counter, pulled a folded envelope from his coat pocket. This came to the sheriff's office last week. Letter from the Department of Interior. Said the town council reforms in Bitter Creek passed review. The land that was taken's been returned. Some folks even wrote you into the town record. First false conviction reversed by public vote. Jack blinked. They really did that. They really did. He set the letter on the counter and tapped it gently. You left more than stitches behind. She looked at him a moment longer. You ever think of staying somewhere? He shrugged. I got a horse that gets twitchy if I sleep more than 3 nights under the same roof. She smiled. Sounds like you. He stepped back, touched the brim of his hat. I got a deputy now, and a second chance at the badge I once ran from. You gonna keep it this time? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, for a while. She followed him to the door. You'll write. If I remember how he said, try, she said, holding his gaze. I've got a mailbox now. He lingered on the porch one more moment, then turned and mounted up the leather creaking under his weight. His horse snorted, eager for motion. And just before he turned the corner, he looked back. You keep this place warm, Miss Thorne. I will, she said. You just keep asking the hard questions. He nodded once, then rode on. The bell above her door jingled gently as she stepped back inside. Outside, the streets bustled with carts and chatter. But inside, peace settled in like sunlight. Because Jack hadn't just survived, she had stitched a new life from the same cloth that once tried to hang her. And somewhere down the road, Caleb Mackenzie, once a drunk, now a lawman, again kept riding toward the next town, the next truth, the next soul that needed saving. And this time his badge shined clean in the light.